When necessary becomes unstoppable. Have you ever wondered what happens when someone realizes that change isn't just desirable? It's absolutely necessary. What transformative power is unleashed when we cross that threshold from this would be nice to this must happen? I recently had the extraordinary privilege of interviewing the legendary Dorothy Height on the Soft Girl Era podcast, a woman whose life embodied the profound truth that when something is truly necessary, it becomes unstoppable. For those who may not know, Dorothy Height wasn't just a participant in the civil rights movement, she was one of its architects. As the leader of the National Council of Negro Women for over 40 years, she stood shoulder to shoulder with Martin Luther King Jr., though often without the same recognition. Her fingerprints are on virtually every major civil rights advancement of the 20th century, and her legacy continues to shape our pursuit of justice today. What struck me most during our conversation wasn't just the magnitude of her accomplishments, but the driving force behind them. It was necessary, she said with such clarity and conviction that it stopped me in my tracks. Not optional, not preferable, necessary. Those three words, it was necessary, carry a weight that transforms everything they touch. They cut through excuses, silence doubts, and forge paths where none existed before. Today, I want to explore what happens when we recognize that certain actions, certain changes, certain revolutions aren't just good ideas. They're absolutely essential. And I want to challenge each of us to identify what's truly necessary in our own lives and communities. Because here's what I've learned: necessity is the most powerful motivator in human experience. When something becomes truly necessary, excuses evaporate, hesitation dissolves, the impossible suddenly becomes inevitable. Dorothy Height understood this at a bone deep level. As she recounted her experiences leading the NCNW during the turbulent 1960s, I was struck by how matter of factly she described facing down systemic racism, entrenched voter suppression in the South, and devastating lack of opportunities for Black women. The challenges weren't just daunting, they were designed to be insurmountable. But Height didn't see options. She saw necessities. When Black citizens were being systematically denied their constitutional right to vote, Height didn't just recognize the injustice, she organized voter registration drives throughout the South. When she saw that political education was lacking in Northern communities, she established voter education programs there too. When young activists needed support to continue their essential work, she created scholarship programs to sustain them. These weren't nice additions to her organizational agenda. They were absolute necessities for progress. Necessity drives action, Hyde emphasized during our conversation. When something is truly necessary, it compels us to act with urgency and conviction. I've been thinking about that statement for weeks now. How many times have I hesitated to make a change because it seemed difficult? How often have I convinced myself that something was optional when in truth it was essential? Height's journey didn't begin with her leadership of the NCNW. Long before that, she was working with the YWCA, focusing on improving conditions for Black domestic workers. This wasn't glamorous work. It wasn't headline grabbing, but it was necessary, and that made it worthy of her full commitment. There's something almost comical about how necessity strips away our pretensions, isn't there? When something is truly necessary, we don't have the luxury of waiting for perfect conditions or unanimous approval. We don't have time for endless committee meetings or paralysis by analysis. We simply act because we must. Over decades of advocacy, Height secured funding for the NCNW's national headquarters, launched vocational training programs, created business support initiatives, and built infrastructure that would empower generations of Black women. Her work was so impactful that she received both the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1994 and the Congressional Gold Medal in 2004. But here's what fascinates me most about Height's approach. She understood that necessity isn't just about identifying problems, it's about creating sustainable solutions. Leadership is built on necessity, she told me. The most impactful leaders emerge when circumstances demand change. This perspective transforms how we view leadership itself. Leadership isn't about titles or recognition, it's about responding to what's necessary with courage and conviction. It's about seeing what must be done and doing it, not because it's easy or because it brings acclaim, but because the alternative is unacceptable. Hyde embodied this truth throughout her life. She didn't wait for permission to lead, she didn't require validation from established power structures. She simply recognized what was necessary and moved toward it with unwavering determination. And this brings me to the third principle Hyde emphasized in our conversation. Community empowerment is non negotiable. Investing in people, especially marginalized groups, is not just beneficial, it's vital for lasting progress. This is where necessity becomes revolutionary. When we recognize that empowering communities isn't just a nice idea, but an absolute necessity, we approach the work differently. We become less concerned with quick fixes and more invested in sustainable transformation. We stop asking, is this convenient? And start asking, is this essential? For Height, empowering Black women and youth wasn't a side project, it was the central necessity of her work. She understood that lasting change couldn't be imposed from outside, it had to be cultivated from within communities themselves. This perspective challenges the way we think about social change. Too often, we approach community work with a savior mentality, believing we're doing something optional and therefore deserving of praise. Height's approach reminds us that community empowerment isn't charity, it's necessity. And when we recognize it as necessary, we approach it with the urgency, respect, and commitment it deserves. I'm reminded of a powerful moment in our conversation when Height reflected on the civil rights movement. We didn't have the luxury of waiting for perfect conditions, she said. We moved forward because we had to, because silence wasn't an option anymore. That phrase, silence wasn't an option anymore, captures the essence of necessity. There comes a point when staying quiet, staying still, staying comfortable simply isn't possible anymore. Not if we want to live with integrity, not if we want to create the world we know is possible. For the listeners of the Soft Girl Era podcast, particularly the high achieving Black women between 38 55 who have spent years in survival mode, this message resonates deeply. Many have led teams, raised families, held down households, and carried communities. They've done what was necessary for others. Now they're recognizing that caring for themselves isn't optional either. It's absolutely necessary. This is where Height's wisdom offers a profound reframe. Self care for Black women isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's essential. Saying no to depletion and yes to restoration isn't just nice, it's necessary for survival and impact. As one listener shared after hearing Height's interview, I've been treating my own well being as optional for decades while seeing everyone else's needs as necessary. This conversation completely shifted my perspective. That's the power of recognizing necessity. It transforms how we prioritize, how we allocate resources, how we make decisions. When something moves from the should category to the must category, everything changes. So, what's necessary in your life right now? What change? What action? What boundary have you been treating as optional when deep down you know it's essential? Maybe it's finally addressing that health concern you've been minimizing. Maybe it's having that difficult conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe it's pursuing that dream you've convinced yourself is a luxury. Maybe it's saying no to commitments that deplete you so you can say yes to what truly matters. Height's legacy challenges us to ask, what would happen if you recognize that action wasn't optional anymore? What would change if you approached it with the urgency of necessity? Because here's the truth: when we recognize something is truly necessary, we find resources we didn't know we had. We discover courage we didn't realize was within us. We connect with communities we didn't know were waiting to support us. Necessity doesn't just drive action, it transforms what we believe is possible. The world doesn't change because of people who do what's convenient. It changes because of people who do what's necessary. Dorothy Height didn't just understand this truth, she lived it every day for decades. And her impact continues to ripple through our society, touching lives she never met, including yours and mine. So today I leave you with this challenge. Identify one thing in your life or community that isn't just important, it's necessary. One change that isn't just desirable, it's essential. And then commit to moving toward it with the urgency, clarity, and determination it deserves. Because when we align ourselves with what's truly necessary, we become unstoppable. Just as Dorothy Height showed us through her remarkable life, necessity isn't a burden. It's the force that reveals our greatest strength, our deepest courage, and our most profound impact. The question isn't whether you'll face what's necessary. The question is, will you embrace it now with purpose and power? Or will you wait until circumstances leave you no choice? The necessary path is rarely the easy one, but it is always, always the one most worth taking. Thank you.